Φίλες και φίλοι, καλησπέρα. Ελληνίδες και Έλληνες, καλησπέρα. Απανταχού όλης της γης, όπου και να βρίσκεστε, να έχετε ένα καλό υπόλοιπο στο Σαββατοκύριακο. Να είστε όλοι καλά και να κάνετε κάτι πάρα πολύ βασικό, το οποίο μόλις το ανακαλύπτω τώρα, ότι για πάρα πολλούς από εσάς που δεν παίρνετε τα νέα μας ή δεν παίρνετε ειδοποιήσεις, μόλις ανακαλύψαμε ότι έχει πάει το σύστημα του φατσοβιβλίου αυτόματα και σας έχει τοποθετήσει το «μας αρέσει», άμα θα κάνετε ξανά κλικ, στο να μην λαμβάνετε νέα από εμάς αυτόματα, χωρίς εσείς να το ξέρετε. Γι' αυτό διορθώστε το, γι' αυτό το λόγο δεν παίρνετε νέα. Λοιπόν, να έχετε ένα καλό βράδυ όλοι. Πάρα πολύ σημαντική η σημερινή εκπομπή. Θα παρακολουθήσουμε μια εκρηκτική συνέντευξη με τον Dr. Brian Ardis και τον Jason Surka, οι οποίοι αποκαλύπτουν την αλήθεια, την προέλευση και το προσδόκητο αντίδοτο για το COVID-19 που κατέστρεψε στην κυριολεξία τον κόσμο. Ο Dr. Brian Ardis είναι ένας διάσημος γιατρός και ερευνητής που βρέθηκε στην πρώτη γραμμή της αποκάλυψης της προέλευσης του COVID-19 και της έβρεσης τρόπων αντιμετώπισης των επιπτώσεών του, και παρά την αντίσταση από μεγάλες φαρμακευτικές εταιρείες, ο Dr. Ardis παραμένει σταθερός στην αποστολή του να αποκαλύψει όλη την αλήθεια, όπως και να έχει. Το TLS παρακολουθεί στενά την πρόοδο του Dr. Ardis τον περασμένο χρόνο και υποστηρίζει τις προσπάθειές του να διαδώσει αυτές τις ζωτικής σημασίας πληροφορίες σε ένα παγκόσμιο κοινό. Αυτή η συνέντευξη χρησιμεύει για να φέρει τις πολύτιμες γνώσεις του στο προσκήνιο. Μοιραστείτε αυτή τη συνέντευξη παντού για να φτάσει σε όλο τον κόσμο. Είναι ένα βίντεο και μία συνέντευξη την οποία δεν περιμένατε να ακούσετε. Μία καλή ακρόαση, καλή συνέχεια.
The speed at which the injuries are going to occur to anybody who received these two different plasmids called mRNA injections, the speed at which your symptoms are going to show up or disease outcomes are going to show up are going to be based on two things: your health and your microbiome.
The only way that you're going to be able to encode your original quantum biological signature and your original DNA is through your own undifferentiated DNA. How are you going to get that?
Water that comes out of your tap is the primary delivery system for their bioweapons. And right now, they're in the third generation of their bioweapon development and has gone genetic.
Knowing about the NRF2 pathway was one of the greatest breakthroughs in preventive medicine that there's been.
Does that have an application with cancer and
Absolutely.
neurodegenerative disease also?
Absolutely.
Autoimmune disease? How so?
Something told me I had to watch this docuseries. The neuropathy has pretty much gone away.
And you can solve all those issues by handling the root cause from a natural standpoint, looking at what nature can provide for us.
I am so thankful for the work that you do, because your work really has saved my life.
The interview you're about to watch has huge implications. Today, we have the privilege of bringing the facts to the table, verifiable proof and evidence, absolutely explosive material that will change the way that you see the world forever, that will change the way that you not only see our own history, but how we move forward will change for the better. I present to you The Antidote with Dr. Brian Ardis. Dr. Brian Ardis, I want to say thank you for your time and everything that you've been doing.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to be here.
You're bringing evidence, you're bringing proof, and you're saying, don't trust me and don't believe me. Let me show you what's actually going on here. So where do you want to begin with all of this? I mean, how did all of this start?
For many people who are willing to look, you will realize the grand illusion that was cast by the media to the entire world to convince us of some narrative they wanted us to accept, when in fact it's not reality. So for me, the coronavirus pandemic, I cannot even believe I'm sitting here 4 years into this pandemic, realizing the great illusions that were projected by the media and by our medical professionals and by scientists around the world, medical journals around the world, that this was a bat virus being spread from a cave out of Wuhan. And from the very beginning, the first month of the pandemic, declared January of 2020, DNA experts said, this is not a bat virus. The origin of this virus isn't even bats. It's actually 2 snakes. Imagine my shock to learn that 2.5 years into the pandemic. And then wondering, where did it all go wrong? And how did everybody come to accept this reality, this new reality? How did that happen? How did we go from DNA experts confirming the genetic makeup of what was causing people to be sick were actually venom proteins from 2 snakes, the king cobra and the Asian crate snake that I had never heard of. And that really took me down this incredible journey, realizing that we had all been lied to. The entire medical profession, the entire health agencies around the world, World Health Organizations, have all been lying to the entire globe once again.
My question for you is, I still don't understand what happened and how this thing was manufactured, if it was manufactured. All I know is you're now tying it back to snake venom and snakes as opposed to bats. How do you get there? How did we start there? What evidence and proof do you have as well to be able to bring us from that point to where we're at today, tying it back to snake venom? Because to the common man, they hear that and they say, you're crazy. That's science fiction. It's not real.
The entire narrative of COVID is a damn illusion, and they have lied to all of you. And every single symptom of COVID-19 acutely, every single symptom of COVID long-term that they call post-COVID syndrome or long hauler COVID-19 syndrome, every single one of those symptoms, I can show you which venoms and from what creatures and snakes are creating your symptoms. I can show you, and I can tell you. And then I can explain how to actually get rid of the symptoms with one singular antidote that they don't want you to know. And the whole world has been lying to you about this antidote for the last at least 50 years. I went online and I actually typed in Google, what is the origin sources of COVID? And I couldn't believe that CNN Health published a paper. And it reads, I can put it up on the screen, couldn't believe it. It reads, snakes could be the source of the Wuhan coronavirus outbreak, and it's in January of 2020. And then the very first sentence of the article reads, snakes, the Chinese crate and the Chinese cobra may be the original source of the newly discovered coronavirus that has triggered an outbreak of a deadly infectious respiratory illness in China this winter. And then they publish this. And they take what's called a squared Euclidean distance. This is from a species with this set of DNA, how far away from the DNA of what we're looking at, how far away is the squared Euclidean distance? It's a genetic term I had to learn. What's the squared Euclidean distance between that DNA and all other species? And the smaller that number gets, the closer you get to the origin creature. And then they show you the image. These are all the animals it's most likely to be. And to the far left,
snakes,
is the origin. Farther right you go, you get away from the origin.
So the third one's a bat and the first 2 are snakes.
That's right. And the first snake is the crate snake, which is an Asian venomous deadly snake. The second, you can see from the illustration, is a cobra. And that wasn't the only people that figured it out. These people did it in January in China. And then in April 2020, French researchers isolate the spike protein of COVID and they run their own DNA test. Just the spike proteins. These little bitty things that make this virus different than the first SARS-CoV virus in 2003. They said the only thing different is there's these little proteins on the outside of the virus called spike proteins that did not exist on the first SARS-CoV-1. That was called SARS and MERS. And they isolate the spike protein and they run its DNA sequence. Geneticists do in France, and they publish their findings. In April of 2020, they published their findings. That the spike proteins of COVID are identical to 2 things. A protein in king cobra venom called cobra toxin, and a protein inside the venom of the Asian crate snake called bungarotoxin. Jason, 5 billion people in this world have at least taken one vaccine for COVID. On the NIH's website right now, I want to show a document, because just to set the stage for you here, so I can quote it. On the NIH's website right now is a document for lay people to read, not doctors, for lay people to understand how they made the COVID-19 vaccines. And you've got to see this. The title of this document on the NIH's website right now is Understanding COVID-19 mRNA Vaccines. Now, Jason, if I asked you and your audiences, what did they tell the world they were vaccinating people against or to help them fight?
COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2.
Yep. Okay, so SARS-CoV-2 is the correct thing. SARS-CoV-2 is what they called the virus. The virus is not COVID-19. The symptoms that you're supposedly getting from this virus called SARS-CoV-2, which include symptoms like fever, chills, fatigue, loss of taste and smell, those symptoms are put in a category they call COVID-19 disease. Mm-hmm. So people don't get COVID-19. You get something causing a bunch of symptoms they're calling COVID. You cannot look in a microscope, look in someone's body and go, oh, you have COVID. COVID doesn't exist. It's a collection of symptoms, okay? No different than like lupus. You don't see lupus in a body. It doesn't exist. It's not in there. You don't see AIDS in a person. AIDS isn't floating around in a body. They say HIV virus causes these symptoms of immune deficiency that we're going to call as a collection AIDS.
Okay, so just to clarify, COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2, two different things.
Two totally
SARS-CoV-2, they're calling the virus, and the expression of symptoms and that, you know, group of symptoms would be what we now refer to as COVID-19.
Exactly right. So we are being told with the COVID-19 vaccines, I've asked you if I'm correct with this question, did the world tell us, and the health agencies around the world, did they tell us the vaccine would help protect us from SARS-CoV-2 virus?
Many times.
And would it help prevent worse outcomes if we got another version of SARS-CoV-2?
Many times.
Did they tell us it would help to prevent worse hospitalization and death experiences for those who get future COVID variants?
I can hear the voiceover of Dr. Anthony Fauci in my head.
Right. This is what we're told, okay? I want to show you on the screen on this document that's right now on the NIH's website. When they're teaching the public this pamphlet titled Understanding COVID-19 mRNA Vaccines, they actually say this. I'm going to read you the quote.
Please.
I have it highlighted in blue. mRNA vaccines do not contain the SARS-CoV-2 virus. If the virus was the issue worldwide, don't you think they would have put a little bit of this virus inside the vaccine to protect you and help you build an immunity, an artificial immunity against maybe other SARS-CoV-2 virus variants they're saying is mutating around the world? Is that weird to you at all at home that they didn't put any SARS-CoV-2 virus in the actual shots? Your very next question should be this. Well, what'd they put in there? Mm-hmm. Well, I'll show you, because they tell you in a separate pamphlet on the same website.
Okay.
This pamphlet's titled COVID-19 mRNA Vaccine Production. And they state here, early in the COVID-19 pandemic, researchers used state-of-the-art gene sequencers to quickly sequence the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And then this sequence was quickly shared with the other researchers. Now, pay attention to the first part of this paragraph. It reads, early in the COVID-19 pandemic. You don't get any earlier than January of 2020. What did they find early on in the pandemic? They found that the origin of COVID was two snakes. This is right now in a pamphlet titled COVID-19 mRNA Vaccine Production. And they set the stage for you to understand that we had geneticists around the world early on in the pandemic figure out the gene sequence of COVID, and then we shared it quickly with the rest of the world. Oh, did you? Well, this is what you found, that it was bat. It wasn't a bat virus. They found it was two snakes' venoms. In fact, this is the French researchers' study. I took this right out of their paper in April of 2020. You'll see at the bottom of the graphic, SARS-CoV-2S is the spike protein of COVID. Right above there, the genetic sequence is identical to bungarotoxin, which is venom from the crate snake. The very first one at the top is cobra toxin from the king cobra. If you can't follow this narrative. Okay, so this is what they say. You're looking at it on the screen, but we're going to go up into the paragraph in the pamphlet on the NIH's website. They said they selected the spike protein gene as their vaccine candidate.
Okay.
So they didn't put any SARS-CoV-2 virus in there. They just put this thing supposedly on the outside of the virus called a spike protein that was found to be king cobra venom and crate venom by geneticists all around the world.
So just to get this straight, you're saying that they're putting that venom in the vaccine itself?
I'm going to show you how they're putting it in there because they put it in the pamphlet.
Okay.
All right, so you can call it, okay, this is really funny. You can call it a spike protein all you want. The spike proteins are snake proteins. They're just giving them some other nomenclature, using language to keep it hidden from you. What it really is. Geneticists over and over and over already confirmed it's actually identical to venom proteins from snakes. All right, so they're telling you, we didn't put the virus in there. We're only trying to protect you from the spike proteins in these vaccines. We don't care about the virus. If the virus was a big deal, they would have put it in the vaccines. If the virus existed, they might have put it in the vaccines.
Interesting.
I don't know. Why did you not put it in there? No one's ever been able to prove it exists. They can prove with DNA testing that these venoms exist in every COVID-19 patient around the world. They have found these venoms in every single COVID-19 patient around the world. How did they put venom-based snake proteins into the COVID shots? They tell you right here. This is the actual demonstration. They say we take the spike protein gene and we put it inside of what is called a DNA plasmid.
What is that?
And I'll read it to you. It says the target spike protein gene is then synthetically manufactured. So the venom-based spike protein, snake protein, is synthetically manufactured and inserted into a plasmid, a small circular piece of DNA. So they just make this little ring of DNA and they can insert any payload they want into that plasmid. And this plasmid is really, really little. And it gets absorbed into bacteria, into yeast, into your mammal cells. And the instruction of a plasmid is to tell whatever cell it gets into to manufacture whatever the spike protein gene is.
And that's how they're putting it into the vaccine itself.
They are putting these plasmids into the vaccines and injecting them inside of you.
Okay, but people were getting sick before the vaccine.
Oh yeah. So the way they actually created the COVID-19 pandemic was to spray these plasmids through the air, in your water, and in your food. And they are manufacturing tons of these plasmids around the world to create pandemics.
For anybody that's watching that would call you a crazy conspiracy theorist, can you show us proof and evidence of that?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so I actually came out with a documentary called Watch the Water. Freaked out a whole lot of people, made a whole lot of medical professionals upset because they all said, you can't drink snake venom because I proposed they're putting this in our water systems and you're just drinking it. The idea of locking down the world and telling everybody to stop breathing on each other, you're going to spread this respiratory virus to each other, and we're all on lockdown and the worst variant of COVID makes the whole world sick while we're all locked down. How'd they get it to us? How did it get spread to all of us? We're in our houses and we all have air conditioning and filters in our home and HVAC units. How did we all get this respiratory virus inside of our bodies in our houses? We only pay the government to deliver one thing into all of our houses in every industrialized nation around the world.
Water.
Water. Snake venom is water soluble. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I had to look it up. I was like, could they be doing it this way? Can venom of snakes be absorbed through your skin like in a shower and in a bathtub? Yes, it can. I did not know this. I had to go look it up. They are conducting studies all over the world for decades. How do we get venom of cobras, crate snakes, and marine shell creatures in the ocean's venoms? How do we get them into the bodies of people? They know they can get you to drink it. They know they can inject it. And they know it'll get absorbed right through your skin through water. And they publish it over and over and over that they've been doing this. When you get to the DNA plasmids, remember, vaccines and vaccine agendas forever has been, there's a flu season. You've all been exposed to the flu. In order to protect you from this new variant of the flu, we need to give you this vaccine. We're going to put a little bit of the flu in you, a little bit.
This is different.
So that your immunity can create some reaction to that flu virus that we gave you in the shot, so that when you're exposed to the flu in the future, you already have immunity ready. They just told you they didn't put SARS-CoV-2 in these vaccines. They only put DNA plasmids inside of them to protect you from COVID.
What you're basically, I'm going to say implying here, but it's even more than that, is there's a form of like a mass genocide going on.
Oh, there is a mass genocide going on, for sure.
Okay, so let me play...
It started in the hospitals, by the way.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. You're saying the government in the United States is now putting this, you know, through everybody's water system. What about the rest of the world? The whole world was getting sick basically simultaneously, more or less. So you're saying that this was something globally beyond just the United States government?
For sure, the entire world.
How do they orchestrate something like that?
Through the water systems. Super easy. This is actually an agenda that started out in the Nazi Holocaust concentration camps. They had two things they discovered in Nazi Germany that they could actually control their people inside of those actual camps. Two things. They knew they had to control their water systems, and they had to control the vaccines injections into them. And they were experimenting with metals to see if they could control and subdue their actual resistance. And then they knew they could poison them and subdue them through their water systems. When we brought all over the Nazi war crime people into the United States, put them into the CIA, put them into NASA, just a few years later is when the water treatment systems of America were built.
Really?
And this is when the vaccine agenda in America took off. They are using the water delivery systems to create pandemics. And there was a warning written in 2007. There's a paper written titled Water and Terrorism. And it goes through all major industrialized nations in the whole world where the weaknesses are inside their treatment systems for water that would allow any terrorist organization, group, country, you name it, to put anything they wanted into the water, deliver it to any communities or villages, create a pandemic, weaken those individuals, and be able to take them over with war or by military force.
So it's basically weaponizing our water system.
And they list in 2007, they actually put in the document what can be put in your water systems to create these pandemics. Done and performed and orchestrated by what he calls terrorists. And he lists things like this. E. coli, weaponized E. coli bacteria, weaponized yeast you can put in the water and suspend it. You can put defense toxins from animals in the water and make people sick. The defense toxins from animals are venoms. And then they go so far as to tell you how to manipulate and allow those toxins, poisons, anthrax included, diphtheria toxin included, ricin, they go through all of it. And in the flippin' document, it tells you how to make those deadly toxins, poisons, and pathogens, how to get them to die with a certain amount of chlorine, and how to reduce the chlorine to let it live.
Oh, wow.
You could create an outbreak in your town or in your city. In New York City, you could create an epicenter outbreak in New York, take just a few skyscrapers and put venom in that water, send it up those actual apartments, and you can make thousands of people sick overnight by taking showers, bathing in it, drinking the water. They're going to drink the venom. They're going to break out with what's called respiratory failure or arrest. They're going to end up in your New York hospitals. They're going to pump you full of remdesivir, throw a whole bunch of dead people who died from acute kidney failure from a drug, and set the stage for a global pandemic using America's media conglomerates. The only thing that ends up in the poop and in your wastewater is what you swallowed into your stomach and into your intestines. So the food you eat goes into your esophagus, down into your stomach, into your intestines, and you poop it out. So guess how this virus was getting into everybody that they're sitting there testing the poop water from? You swallowed it. For sure you swallowed it. And it's the only thing that makes sense about this whole thing. So when we get to these DNA plasmids, I didn't know about DNA plasmids until about 4 months ago, actually. Never even knew these things existed until I found this on the NIH website. I was like, oh my God, you're putting DNA plasmids? What are these things? Where'd they come from? And I will give credit where it's due. There's a guy named Kevin McKernan who brought up the fact that these DNA plasmids exist. Dr. Henry Ely starts sharing all this research with me, and I was like, oh my God, this is how they did it. There was no virus. They used DNA plasmids to do this. I just didn't know that geneticists around the world have been making plasmids since the 60s and putting snake venom and other venoms inside of DNA plasmids that they call spike protein genes. I didn't know they were doing that. I had no idea. You just need plasmids and a venom protein gene inserted inside of that, and then you put inside that plasmid something called a promoter. It's an instruction in genetics, genetic term. It's a promoter that tells the DNA in a mammal cell, or the DNA in a bacteria, or the DNA inside of a yeast cell or fungal cell to make the spike protein gene and spit it out of you. So bacteria and yeast suck in the plasmids, your own cells suck in the plasmids, and then they release the actual venom into the body or the environment, wherever it is. And that's how they got COVID inside of you. Just so you know, anybody out there living with long hauler COVID symptoms after having a mild case of COVID, you had DNA plasmids with the spike protein genes of king cobras and bungarotoxin in your body. They called COVID. They even PCR tested it and found that's what you had. And then you have had lingering symptoms for 1.5 to 2 years ever since, because in your body, these plasmids were what got inside of you. Now they're in your cells, they're in bacteria in your cells and in your bowels, like E. coli, and what's called enterobacter cells. And they're also inside of yeast, inside of your bowels, which can be called candida or yeast. All of that microbiome in your bowel is what they are weaponizing to be biological weapon manufacturing facilities in your own body.
So you're now creating more of that within.
You are nonstop making the venom proteins over and over and over and over and over, as long as those bacteria, yeast, and your cells are in your body manufacturing it.
Question.
And this has already been confirmed, by the way.
Animals, babies, animals I don't really see get sick at all, and babies very, very little. How do you explain that if we're all drinking the same water?
When I came out with the snake venom theory, as they called it, and that they were doing it through the water, king cobra venom and crate venom, when I woke up the next morning after the Watch the Water documentary, scientists from around the world that I'd been connected to and conversations in my email were sending me all these research studies, because it was the final thing for them they couldn't figure out for the whole 2 years of COVID. No one could explain to medical professionals and scientists why this respiratory virus was affecting adults, but not babies and children, until now. And to be honest with you, I actually didn't do that research. These people did. So there's a bunch of people around the world that wanted to know, what is the difference in children and adults when it relates to snake venom? And what is published around the world since the 1970s is that children are not as affected by venom as adults are. Babies, children, adolescents, as you get older, you're more susceptible to the venom. And do you know what they publish as a natural inhibitor or a blocker to the toxic effects of venoms in humans? Melatonin hormone. And do you know what babies, children have twice as much as adults do? Melatonin.
Animals as well. Dogs are always
Animals
relaxing.
as well. You see them all, they're always sleeping. This was the final thing for all of them. When they found the studies were confirming that melatonin by itself as a hormone blocks 50% of the toxicity of all venoms worldwide. They were like, oh my God.
While we're on inhibitors, what other things are inhibitors for something like snake venom? And I'm curious to see if there's a connection between certain things that were banned in the United States or around the world.
There is a huge connection. So, and I'm really glad you brought this up. I did not know what this interview was going to be about. I didn't know it was going to be called Antidote, but God, I was hoping you were going to ask me this when you told me this morning what the title was. Okay, in April of 2020, you have the studies, you're going to share it with the audience, you've got to show the audiences. They showed and proved that the DNA sequence of COVID-19 was identical to cobra toxin, bungarotoxin, and then when I showed the graphic, it shows there's 3 parts of really close similarity to the rabies virus genes, pieces of it, of the rabies virus. And in April of 2020, the geneticist said, the French scientist said, this finally explains all of the symptoms of COVID. Cobra toxin, bungarotoxin, and these rabies virus segments. And what they said was, all around the world, what you're hearing is that the SARS-CoV-2 virus's spike protein is binding to ACE2 receptors in the body to make you sick. People at home, don't worry about that. They were saying around the world in medical journals, and all the doctors were believing it, that on the outside of your cells are these things called ACE2 receptors. ACE2 is acetylcholine receptors, a chemical that transmits information from one cell to the other. They were saying ACE2 receptors were what the spike protein was binding to and getting inside your cell to cause an infection called COVID. Okay? These researchers in April of 2020 said, no, it isn't ACE2 receptors. In fact, it can't be ACE2 receptors. We just conducted a study and confirmed that ACE2 receptors don't exist in the lungs. So this can't even be a respiratory infection. You believe that? There's no ACE2 receptors on the outside of the cells in your lungs, but they're telling you this virus is entering your lung cells by going through the ACE2 receptor to get in. And they're like, but there are no ACE2 receptors on the outside of your cells in your lungs. So how can this be a respiratory virus? Cobra toxin, bungaro toxin of these two snakes, and rabies virus all target one receptor in the human body. And they're called alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. For short, they're called nicotine receptors.
There we go.
But they were specific. They said it's alpha-7 nicotine receptors. And this finally explains all the symptoms of COVID, because they said in April of 2020, the unique thing about cobra toxin and bungaro toxins from these two snakes, these are neurotoxins, meaning they don't target just the lungs. They go to your brain and they cross the blood-brain barrier immediately. And then they bind to what are called alpha-7 nicotine receptors in your brainstem. And when venom hits them, it shuts off the cell's function of that nerve. And the nerves in your brainstem control your diaphragm's contraction to breathe and your heart rate's ability to contract to pump blood. And when those neurotoxic venom proteins hit the nicotine receptors, it suppresses the diaphragm's ability to contract, and then the animal or the human becomes hypoxic and goes into respiratory failure.
Hypoxic meaning not enough oxygen.
Hypoxic means low oxygen. Do you remember everybody was wearing pulse oximeters for the first time ever? No one even knew what that was except for people in hospitals using them. Now everybody had one from Target, Walmart, everywhere around the world. Everybody's putting one on their finger, watching their oxygen go down. They all publish it. This is a side effect of venom. This is how venomous snakes kill their prey, by paralyzing their diaphragm and their heart.
What about the taste and smell?
Yep. So when I said they said it answers all the questions to all symptoms of COVID, every single nerve has alpha-7 nicotine receptors. The nerves in your tongue that control taste, when venom hits it, it shuts off that cell's function. It doesn't kill the cell, it just shuts it off. So if that cell that God designed and put inside of your body is designed to taste, it no longer will taste as long as the venom is bound to it, to the nicotine receptor. You also have nicotine receptors in your sense of smell nerves in your brain or in your nose called the olfactory bulb. And when venom would hit that, it would actually shut off your sense of smell now. In this paper in April of 2020, they said all the symptoms of COVID can be explained by these venom proteins they're calling the spike protein from these two snakes. And it is explained by these nicotine receptors they all target. And this finally explains, Jason, April of 2020. This finally explains why around the world, when hospitals were emptied to get ready for the flood of all these sick people, why it was smokers were the least affected worldwide. In this April 2020 paper by the French scientist, they said, the reason why smokers aren't being affected is because of the circulating nicotine in their body, and nicotine has a 30 times higher binding affinity to those receptors than venoms do. So if there's nicotine floating around in your blood or in your brain
it'll take over.
It will release the venom and bind to nicotine. That's how these receptors are designed perfectly to only grab onto nicotine. So they said the benefit of the nicotine in smokers is helping people. They did not tell the world to go smoke, but their actual document reads, we are so sure about this because even ivermectin is being touted around the world as showing proof to stopping the SARS-CoV-2 replication and the worsening outcomes for COVID. And the world doesn't know this. The medical profession still doesn't know this unless they've watched my presentations. They published. Ivermectin also binds to alpha-7 nicotine receptors. This is how it's working. It mimics the effect of nicotine.
And you're saying ivermectin is also stronger than the venom?
It is.
So we'll override it.
But it is not as strong as nicotine, so it will not protect everybody from the venoms. The dosing will be specific. Nicotine is the highest potent affinity, they call it, to binding to those receptors, even over ivermectin. And I want to speak to that. There are people around the world, even medical doctors, who have been taking prophylactically ivermectin for 2 years, and they still have their long hauler COVID symptoms. When I tell them to chew nicotine gum, they all report within 3 days all their symptoms go away. So they have that going into them every day, but it's not doing the job. It's because the body's designed to grab nicotine more than anything else.
I've seen a lot of people over the past month, 2 months, specifically because of your work, inspired by you and what you're bringing to the table, start walking around with nicotine patches. And I'm looking like, what's going on here? The nicotine patch, to my knowledge and to the rest of the world, is to help you wean off of wanting to smoke, because we have this association with nicotine, addictive, terrible, horrible, you want to move away from it. So can you clarify your view and your perspective of nicotine with any nuances? Because when I heard it for the first time, I'm like, whoa, what? You know, it's what? It's
the whole world reacted that way at first.
Because it sounds crazy. We need to acknowledge that elephant in the room and then explain it, because most people will hear that and be like, what is this guy talking about?
Yeah, so I don't know how long you want this interview to go for, but this is going to be an incredible opportunity to educate and save a whole lot of lives around the world, okay? And I really mean it genuinely. This is a miraculous opportunity to help so many people. You asked prior to this question, in April of 2020, French researchers and geneticists confirm and then publish that nicotine in smokers and ivermectin is working against COVID because it binds to these receptors better than venom does. Their very last statement in their actual paper was a request to all governments around the world to invest in funding studies using nicotine patches, nicotine gum as the antidote to COVID to end the pandemic. The very next month, that was April of 2020, the very next month in May of 2020, Anthony Fauci, Joe Biden, all go into the media, go do shows everywhere, in the news, everywhere, telling the world that new data has come up that smokers are the highest at risk for getting COVID and are dying in hospitals around the world. America, there's no better time than now to quit smoking. This is how far the lies go. All right. They flat out needed people to quit smoking so they would get sick to buy into their vaccine agenda in the future, because they weren't getting sick, those that were smoking. All right. Now you're asking about the nicotine and the patches. I just want you to know.
What you just said is the fact that it goes that deep.
Oh, it goes way deeper than that, and we're going to get into this, because I couldn't believe how far this goes. Immediately, people responded, including my wife, who had no taste or smell for 2 years after having a mild case of COVID and had for 6 months ringing in her ears called tinnitus that was so debilitating. She couldn't watch TV, couldn't hear me talking. It was driving her nuts for 6 months. I was giving her every nutritional supplement, we even tried ivermectin. It didn't work. Nothing was working. When I asked her to do the nicotine, she said, first response was, I don't want to try any nicotine product. I don't want to be addicted to nicotine. And I was like, honey, just try the nicotine. Nothing else has worked. These scientists said it's working, right? We should try it. 2 years she struggled with that stuff and wouldn't do it. But when my Watch the Water documentary dropped and I said, the antidote is nicotine, go get nicotine patches, nicotine gum, people around the world did it. My wife didn't want to do it. She was worried about the addictive part. It wasn't until a medical doctor contacted a media outlet and said, get my story to Dr. Artis, please. A medical doctor had gone deaf in Australia in her right ear after having a mild case of COVID. She had been confirmed by other medical professionals that she had 100% hearing loss and would be deaf for life as a side effect of COVID. She went and bought nicotine gum, chewed it for 30 minutes, and she felt like air in her ear.
Oh my God,
and then at 45 minutes of 1 2 milligram nicotine tablet, gum, at 45 minutes, 100% of her hearing was restored.
Wow.
Okay, so when my wife hears this being reported to me in an interview in my house that I'm just participating in via the computer and the internet, she leaves without telling me, goes to Costco and buys this case of Nicorette gum, but doesn't tell me, and then starts chewing it 4 times a day for 10 minutes and spitting it out. And on day 3, all of her symptoms disappeared.
After 2 years of not having it.
After 2 years. Okay, when I say this is really important, my wife was hesitant to try this because of the worry of addiction, of nicotine. Do you want to know how far the deception goes and how far the lies go?
That was going to be my question about the addictive factor.
Everyone at home, look up on the internet right now, look up Harvard 2015 study, nicotine is not addictive. So they do an animal study with nicotine. They want to know just how potent of an addictive substance is nicotine in 2015. And they can't get any of the animals to be addicted to strict nicotine. And then Harvard submits FOIA requests of the federal government to find out how did the tobacco giants make their products addictive if nicotine isn't the addictive substance? Because we've all been lied to. Harvard figured it out in 2015. They get the documents from the 1970s and 80s. The tobacco giants at that point started to make what they called light cigarettes. And they couldn't get anybody to rebuy them because they weren't addicted to them. They weren't addictive enough. So
but they had nicotine in them.
Yeah, they had nicotine in them.
So what was the difference between those and the other ones?
Yeah, so they just reduced the amount of tobacco product in these cigarettes, however they did it. Maybe they made them smaller to make them lighter. Who knows? I didn't even get that far. I didn't even care because what was revealed was the magic. They hired chemists to come in and actually tell them, how do we make our tobacco products addictive? Because people aren't buying them. This is in the 70s. And chemists go, well, it'll be easy. If you just add a chemical called pyrazines to the nicotine and to the tobacco plant, everybody will be addicted to it.
How do you spell that?
Pyrazines. They add 2 products to enhance flavor profiles and aromas, and they are super addictive. In fact, Harvard published that the pyrazines are what create the dependency for all tobacco products, including nicotine.
Let me just recap for a second. Nicotine isn't addictive.
Right.
Harvard proved it in 2015.
Right.
In the 70s, the industry basically hired chemists to figure out how to make it addictive to sell more.
Yes.
That's when they introduced pyrazines into the equation.
Yes.
And that's what makes cigarettes addictive today.
Yes. So when I say nicotine's not addictive, in January of this year, Jason Shurka, there's a published paper. They collected people from around the world who had a myriad of what they compiled were 21 total long hauler COVID symptoms that people had to be having still for a year and a half after having COVID. Unrelated to the vaccines, this year, January 2023, they wanted to do a study to see how many of the symptoms of people struggling with COVID-19 can we find the worst cases, and then can we give them a treatment that will cure them of their symptoms finally, after exhausting all of the measures, medication, supplements, rehab. Some of those symptoms are these. So think about this at home, people. Does anyone you know and still love who had a mild case of COVID ever in the last 4 years, do any of them still struggle with loss of taste and smell at all? Do they struggle with any ringing in their ears at all? Do they struggle with any cognitive impairment at all? Do they struggle with any motor deficits? Picture Parkinson's, shuffling their feet. Do you know anybody who's had that since having COVID? Do they have exercise-induced lethargy? Do they have dyspnea, which is the inability to take a deep breath? Are they challenged breathing-wise? Are you seeing people in your life walking upstairs and having to stand there to catch their breath still 2 years later after having a mild case of COVID? Do you know anybody who's struggling with tachycardia, arrhythmias, or palpitations, chest pains at all since having COVID? Do you know anybody that you love at home? And just, the reason why I'm doing this, 37% of all people worldwide who had any COVID are reporting these symptoms right now.
Wow.
So if you don't know somebody, it's because you're not going outside, or you don't call anybody, or you're a hermit. So when I say, do you know any of these people? You should. Do you know anybody who did not have diabetes and then got a mild case of COVID and now has been diagnosed with diabetes? That's one of the criteria. Do you know anybody who did not have high blood pressure before they got COVID? A year ago, 2 years ago, and now have been diagnosed with high blood pressure and are now on high blood pressure drugs for life? Do you know those people? Do you know anybody now struggling with insomnia since having a mild case of COVID? Do you know every single one of those symptoms is actually caused by snake venom? All of them. And do you know that this study in January of 2023, did you know that they actually said, we're going to do a treatment with these people still struggling for a year and a half, that nothing else has freed you of your symptoms, and we're going to ask you to do one thing and one thing only for 6 days only. These people have been struggling for 2 years, year and a half to 2 years. They only asked them to do one thing for 6 days. And Jason, 100% of all their symptoms went away.
And what was that one thing?
A 7 milligram nicotine patch.
Every day.
Once a day. They asked them every morning to put on a patch of 7 milligrams, nicotine patch. World, they only sell 3 types. 7 milligrams, 14 milligrams, and 21 milligrams. They asked them to take the smallest patch size and wear one either on their arm or leg, wherever, they didn't care, put it on your body. Every morning, put on a new one for 6 days only. 100% of all their symptoms went away. That was this year. Oh my God, the French researchers in April of 2020 begged governments around the world to use nicotine patches, nicotine gum to rid the world of the pandemic. And they all turned their back and then lied to all of you and then said, don't trust any nicotine-containing tobacco product instead. Let's bring us forward. You ready? Oh, in the paper, they described why they hypothesized this was going to work, and they quoted 2 studies. And they said, because the spike protein gene of COVID is from king cobra venom and from crate snake venom, and they target nicotine receptors. And we hypothesize nicotine because it has a binding affinity 30 times more than acetylcholine and venom. It would release the venoms and the symptoms would come back on. Now, I want to explain, this may sound technical, but you got to get this, and we'll show the world this. On every single cell of your human body, Jason, I didn't know this, every single cell of your body has nicotine receptors.
I didn't know that.
Every cell. Macrophages in your body that clean up all the dead disease cells and toxins, your T cells, B lymphocytes, everything that protects you and heals you, every one of those cells has nicotine on them. Jason, beta cells in your pancreas that release insulin to control diabetes and blood sugar. Beta cells are controlled by nicotine receptors. And when venom binds to a nicotine receptor on a beta cell, every time they do that, venoms are called antagonistic to nicotine receptors.
What do you mean by that?
Antagonistic means it shuts off the receptor. So you have these cells floating around, they got these little receptors out there. Picture a light switch on your phone or on your wall. An antagonist will turn off the light, and an agonist, this is what they call it, an agonist turns on the light.
Which would be the nicotine.
The function of the cell would be you turn on the light with nicotine, an agonist, the most perfect agonist in nature, and then you turn it off with the 2 top most published antagonists are snake venom and cone snail venom in the ocean. Antagonists to nicotine receptors.
Other than the associations that we have with nicotine, because generally people go to cigarettes, smoking, things like that, is there anywhere in nature where we can get nicotine? Is nicotine a natural thing that we see in nature, in food, or whatever it may be?
Yeah, that was one of my questions. I was like, in my life, I believe God created us and created this world. So if he created the tobacco plant and put nicotine into it, what other plants did he do that inside of? So in the last year, I did not know this until this year. You just have to go ask questions and go research. Do you know that the second highest containing nicotine food or plant in the whole world is eggplants?
No.
It's tobacco and then eggplants. Do you know that every nightshade vegetable has nicotine in it?
Can you list those for anybody who doesn't know what
squash,
nightshades are?
zucchinis, those are nightshades. Tomatoes,
Yep.
These are all nightshades. Did you know red tomatoes have nicotine in them? And do you know that green tomatoes have 10 times more nicotine than a red tomato does? Does anyone in the world know that every white potato you've ever eaten has nicotine in it? Did you know every cauliflower you've ever eaten has nicotine in it? Did you know celery has nicotine in it? And then I'd like to ask you at home, if nicotine is so addictive, why aren't more people addicted to veggies? These vegetables that I just listed all have nicotine in them, and I didn't make them. Science didn't make them. Nature made them or God made them. In my opinion, God made them. And in my opinion, I'd like to know, why does God put that into our food? And then why did he design us to have nicotine receptors in every part of our body if we weren't supposed to benefit from the nicotine in these plants? How many people do you know have a general understanding that the better food they eat, the better their health is? And the better food list includes the veggies. You all do. Isn't it amazing that God would put these foods that all these people are preaching they reverse diseases with eating? It's curing cancers, curing autoimmune disease if they will just focus on eating those veggies more primarily than processed foods and refined carbohydrates. It's incredible. God got it right the first time.
Would you say that the levels in those foods naturally could be enough to help somebody that's dealing with something like your wife was dealing with for 2 years, or do you need the patch for more concentration?
The patches have more concentration. Tobacco has the highest content, obviously. So the nicotine patches, nicotine gums, have a higher dose. But when you're talking about a 6-day window of time to relieve people of suffering they've been going through for 2 years, why would you not try it? 6 days of nicotine, let it go. In the study, by the way, they published, for anybody reading this paper, if you're concerned about dependency on nicotine, they said not a single one of the participants after day 6 even thought about a nicotine patch or even wanted a nicotine anything.
One of the big reasons I really wanted to focus on the antidote, why we named this interview The Antidote, is not just because we need something for what happened in the past, but right now we're seeing headlines come up all around. Like you said, they're already starting to announce, masks, mandates, potential lockdowns, and so on and so forth, meaning they're planning for another, and I'll say it like this, pandemic, because we understand that it's not exactly what they told us it was. Now, back in April of this year, 4 or 5 months ago, I was given information that I'd love to hear your thoughts on from the TLS organization. They asked me to put out information. It was a 4 or 5 minute video having to do with a future outbreak and pandemic that's being planned, that people need to prepare for through awareness and knowledge. You are a part of that plan. That's why we're sitting here right now. At the time, it was on April 4th of 2023 when this came out. I think it was April 4th of 2023. They basically connected the avian flu to something that they're going to be connecting to the future of what we're seeing now with, future outbreaks, the coronavirus, and so on and so forth. What do you know about that? What do you know about that's upcoming? And will this antidote that you're speaking about with nicotine be now a preventative to this future outbreak or pandemic that we're moving into?
Already you're hearing about this new variant of COVID coming out in America called Eris, supposedly in September this month sometime. Don't worry about that crap. You can let that go. Don't worry about that. What they're going to be setting the stage for is something they're calling Ebola virus and Marburg virus outbreaks. And that's the impression that I want your audiences to know about, and I believe is the warning they need to have. So I want you to be aware that in the last 10 years, they have been studying what are plant-based extracts that prevent the Marburg virus and the Ebola virus from getting inside the cells of a human to infect it. And they've published what is the most effective thing to do that. And for these two supposed viruses, they actually target entry into the cell through something called TPC2 receptors. And if the TPC2 receptors are blocked, those viruses can't get in and you can't get sick at all. Your body will just eliminate this supposed infection for both Ebola and Marburg. So then I looked up what are TPC2 inhibitors. And just for the audience, I didn't care to know what TPC stood for. I didn't even care. I just want to know, what do they know in nature blocks this receptor from allowing a virus in? And they published the most potent thing that actually does that is a component found in grapefruits and in tomatoes. And it's called negarin, Negarin. It's a component found in tomatoes and tomato paste. It's also found in high levels in grapefruit, and it completely blocks the ability of that to get in. Now, I do have to speak to this, though. Once again, in nature, there's a solution already. The Marburg virus is identical to, and if I can give some love to Zev Zelenko, Dr. Zev Zelenko. Dr. Zev Zelenko texted me a month before he died, and he said, Dr. Artis, the next pandemic that's going to be coming, it's going to be coming out of China, and it's going to be called the Marburg virus. And I said, hey, Zev, it's great to hear from you. Zev, it's great to hear from you. And he goes, no, I just want you to know that if I die and something happens to me, I need you to make sure you let the world know we already know there is an antidote. And I said, okay, I'll let him know. And he goes, the antidote is zinc. And I said, awesome. Zev, if something happens to you, I promise I'll make sure the world knows that zinc's an antidote also for that. And then I said this to him a month before he died. Zev, do you know what the Marburg virus is? And he goes, no. And I said, the Marburg virus, I've already looked into this, which is ironic. It's named after a city in Germany, but it's going to come out of China. The Marburg virus is actually the identical symptoms to every single venom found in the boom slang snake in China. And they synthetically have been manufacturing in biological weapons labs and pharmaceutical research labs synthetic versions of boom slang snake venom for decades in multiple factories all over China. And they're inserting them into plasmids, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to release it again. Boom slang snake venom is what causes the hemorrhagic effect, external bleeding out of your eyes, nose, mouth, skin, out of your anus. You're just going to bleed out all over the place, they're going to say, and you're going to fall over dead and see people all over the place just bleeding out of their bodies. That is the impact of boom slang snake venom. And I told Zev that. I said, so just go print out, so I told him, go print out Marburg virus and all of its symptoms, and then print out a snake's venom you've never heard of before, the boom slang snake venom, and just lay it side by side. And you'll see that it's identical. Inside of lemon and tangerine is the antidote to the Marburg virus and to COVID. Did you know vitamin C is inhibitory to all snake venoms?
Only because of you.
Yep. Do you know that's why when Chinese researchers in Wuhan decided to treat every patient with high-dose vitamin C in the hospitals, in January of 2020, 100% of every Chinese patient went home by day 5 with this new novel coronavirus pneumonia. They gave them 25,000 to 65,000 intravenous milligrams of vitamin C, and 100% of all their people went home. Totally well. You know what's amazing about that? They all went home, and then the Chinese government, which makes the most ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C in the whole world for the supplement industry, gave vitamin C to all of its citizens to prevent them from getting COVID the whole time during the pandemic. Did America do that? No. Did American hospitals let their doctors give vitamin C when we were all asking them to do that for our loved ones in the hospital? No, it was, we're being bribed with remdesivir, we're not going to give you vitamin C. You know, Operation Warp Speed, this push to get the COVID-19 vaccine mRNA technology in 9 months, forced on the whole American populace and all over the world. Do you know where the 2 scientists who created mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, do you know where they work currently? At the University of Pennsylvania. Their names are Katalin Kariko and Drew Weissman. These 2 individuals are credited with creating the mRNA COVID-19 technology and their shots. And this is important. The venom that went to Robert Redington came from a serpentarium, they said, in Pennsylvania.
A serpentarium is a place with snakes.
They store snakes, yep, sell snakes, harvest snakes, venom, eggs, you name it. And it was in this Pennsylvania place. All right, this is important. Katalin Kariko and Drew Weissman created mRNA technology. They created what's called mRNA gene therapy. Since 2009, they have been paid by the NIH to create mRNA gene therapy. The specific department at the NIH that pays them to do that is Anthony Fauci's department, the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. In their papers since 2009, 2011, 2012, 2015, 2017, and on. To create COVID-19 vaccines, in every single study since 2009, they state we have to use snake venom phosphodiesterase to cleave the RNA in the mammal to do our mRNA gene therapy. It's in their papers. We use snake venom phosphodiesterase, a component in snake venom that will damage and cut your RNA. And then they quote, we use RNase A, RNase L, RNase T also to cut your RNA, and all RNases are enzymes in snake venom that cut your RNA to kill the prey. I already knew the University of Pennsylvania was the school being credited by the 2 scientists underneath their tutelage who had been creating the mRNA technology and are now receiving Lifetime Achievement Awards for their snake venom-laced vaccines called COVID-19 mRNA shots that they are inserting plasmids with spike protein genes that were confirmed by geneticists to be snake venom. Now, this is important. We talked about the antidotes of nicotine. I decided before I did any of my interviews that if there's snake venom phosphodiesterase inside of these COVID-19 shots, like they say they put in their research studies, what destroys snake venom phosphodiesterase? And then my next thought was, surely these 2 people aren't in Pennsylvania like milking the snakes, right, to put in their shots. There's got to be people manufacturing this stuff, so who are they buying it from? So I went online to find out, can I buy snake venom phosphodiesterase for research? And there's a company called Innovative Research, now bought by Thermo Fisher Scientific. Innovative Research and Thermo Fisher Scientific have the same labeled product, a little bottle of snake venom phosphodiesterase for $150. And it says to the buyer, this is derived from rattlesnake venom, and it's only for research purposes. But they're injecting it inside of all of you. And it says, researchers, you cannot mix snake venom phosphodiesterase with any of these 4 substances because it destroys the snake venom phosphodiesterase from being able to do its toxic payload stuff.
So these 4 things are basically antidotes.
These are the antidotes. And it says you can't mix it with glutathione. which your liver makes. You can't mix it with any N-acetylcysteine. You can't mix it with vitamin C. And it's completely destroyed by something called EDTA.
EDTA, okay.
So they tell you the antidotes, and then they did something really awful, actually. They actually disclosed the very last statement in there is, snake venom phosphodiesterase has an absolute requirement for magnesium to be activated.
What does that mean?
That means the venom can't do its damage without magnesium being bound to it.
And what are you implying here?
That if you've had these shots and you have any symptoms of injury and they're prolonging, you need to stop supplementing magnesium for 3 months. And I mean all magnesium. And we are seeing miraculous results in people who are struggling with cardiac issues from myocarditis, tachycardia, arrhythmias, that if they're on magnesium, if you just simply take them off of it, all the symptoms go away, along with their nicotine and along with the EDTA, these vitamin C recommendations, or N-acetylcysteine. And this is important. In the shots, they state that they use snake venom phosphodiesterase, but the people who manufacture that and sell it to the researchers say you can't mix it with N-acetylcysteine. It'll destroy the venom's toxicity. Do you know that in May of 2020, the FDA put out a statement that they were going to make it illegal for supplement companies to sell N-acetylcysteine? That has been sold by supplement companies for over 75 years here in America. This is May of 2020. The shots didn't come out until December of 2020. But like 5-6 months before, the FDA is coming out saying, supplement companies, you can't sell it anymore. And all these supplement companies around America had a hissy fit, all filed papers against the FDA to get them to stand down, and they did. But it made us all wonder, why would they actually go after N-acetylcysteine? Do you know that N-acetylcysteine is a published natural substance that breaks down and blocks the blood clotting effects of all snake venoms?
Wow.
And what did we see with COVID? Blood clotting. What did you see with long hauler COVID? Blood clotting. What did you see with after the vaccines? Blood clotting. This is just how nefarious it all went, right? In May of 2020, the FDA says nobody can sell N-acetylcysteine. It's now by prescription only. Still hasn't happened, but that was the threat. Same month, they come out and lie to you saying smokers are the most affected by COVID and end up hospitalized and dying, so everybody stop smoking. This is how disgusting this lie went. Okay, we got to go. May 2020 is when all this stuff is occurring. NAC is getting banned. They're going to lie to you about smoking. Do you know what happened in June of 2020, the very next month? Do you know that researchers in Italy, after hearing China say that the origin of COVID was 2 snakes, and the French researcher said the spike protein gene was from the same 2 snakes, did you know that there was a scientist named Carlo Brogna, C-A-R-L-O-B-R-O-G-N-A, in Italy, who published a paper after starting a study early on in the pandemic? He went around Italy and decided to PCR test everybody that was sick for COVID, supposedly, and tested positive. And then he went around all these cities in Italy and collected people who did not test positive for COVID with the PCR test. And he said, great, we're going to take you guys that do not have COVID and are not sick, and we're going to bring you guys here who test positive with a PCR test and are sick. And we want 3 tissue samples from all of you. I want blood, urine, and feces from all of you. And we're going to run 3 tests on your blood, feces, and urine. And they published that only, the results were found, only in the COVID-19 positive patients, not in any of the negative group. There was over 36 different confirmed by 3 different tests, 36 different animal venoms in the COVID-19 patients' blood and in their feces, and none in the negative group. And this included not just the crate snake's venom called bungaro toxin, and not just cobra toxin from the king cobra. There's over 20 different snakes' venom proteins found in every COVID-19 patient. And then there were 16 different animals in the ocean floor, or on the ocean floor. There was a starfish venom in these people from the ocean floor called the crown of thorns starfish, and 15 different cone snail venoms. Cone snails only live in the ocean. Their deadly venom was inside 15 different venoms. Were in the blood and in the feces of only COVID-19 patients. And those venoms are called conotoxins. Jason, That list of the 36 different venoms that Carlo Brogna confirmed by 3 different tests. He did mass spectrometry, then he did liquid chromatography, then he sent the samples to Germany for an additional test he didn't do. But these 3 tests included one called ion fractioning, and you use gases to do this. And the reason why they wanted to do this 3rd step is because if they found animal venom in this person, it would be so specific using this ion fractioning technique, it will tell you exactly what animal the venom protein came from.
Wow.
And this is why you could confirm that it came from the Malayan crate snake, the Chinese king cobra. They found eastern brown snake venom from India. They found coral snake venom from a snake in Uruguay in every one of the patients. They found pit vipers. They found Juracus viper from Brazil venom. They found saw-scaled viper venom, and then 15 different cone snails from many different regions of the world, and starfish's venom called crown of thorns starfish. If you look at the list of the 36 venom proteins, they're all listed in this study called toxin-like peptides found in COVID-19 patients' blood, urine, and feces. If you look at that study, it was published online, peer-reviewed and approved in October of 2021. This paper, if you go through the proteins listed from the venoms of all 36 of those creatures, every one of those individual proteins explains every single symptom of COVID that anybody had. It explains why some people had blood clots. It explains why some people had loss of taste and smell. It explains why some people have cognitive function impairment. It explains why some people have IBS. It explains why some people have diarrhea nonstop, why some are vomiting. Every single protein tells you that. Then there was this thing called angioedema. Did you ever see anybody? I didn't see this, but there were people around the world who had their eyeballs would swell, their eyelids would swell up real big, or their lips would swell up real big, or their other eye would swell up real big. Parts of their faces would swell, ears, whatever. That's called angioedema. And if you look up angioedema, A-N-G-I-O, edema, E-D-E-M-A, if you look that up, look up angioedema and COVID-19, and then hit images, and you'll see all these horrific pictures of people around the world in hospitals with parts of their faces swollen. Inside the COVID-19 study, where they found 36 different venoms, there's a substance in venoms of snakes called bradykinins. And bradykinin, that venom protein, is what causes singularly angioedema. And do you know that they published this bradykinin venom that causes angioedema in anybody? Was also found in every COVID-19 patient. Do you know that bradykinins are blocked by something in nature called bromelain, found in the stalks of pineapples? It's pretty phenomenal because this is actually an ingredient in a product Dr. Peter McCullough is about to come out with. He doesn't even know that bromelain has this inactive ability to protect you from venom, creating this outcome they call angioedema. But you go through that list of proteins, I can explain to you, it doesn't matter who your loved one is, it doesn't matter what they died from, I'm not joking, it doesn't matter what they died from, what they're suffering with, it doesn't matter. It is all perfectly defined by synthetic, manufactured venoms around the world that they're infusing in plasmids, and they're calling it COVID. And I need to speak to this real quick. In 1956, a Dr. Stanley Cohen discovered that when you expose neurological tissue and any epidermal tissue in the human body, epidermis means skin. Epidermis, epi, top of, dermis, skin. Any skin in the body, which also covers every organ in your body, 1956, he took snake venom and he just squirted it next to brain cells and every cell in the body of a mammal. He discovered in 1956 with brains cells of a developing chicken embryo that if he just squirted snake venom next to it in a petri dish, he could grow a brain tumor.
Wow.
Within hours of exposing the brain tissue to venom. A couple years later, he starts experimenting with tissues of kidneys, liver, stomach, breast tissue. Let's put those in cells and see what happens when you actually lay snake venom next to it. And he grew cancer cells in all of them. And he called these 2 side effects of snake venom in a mammal and in a bird, nerve growth factor, brain tumors in the brain, and epidermal growth factor, creating massive tumors and growths in any other tissue in the body. Epidermis is everywhere. Epidermal growth factor, nerve growth factor. Jason, he discovered snake venom does this to mammal tissue and bird tissue in 1956. Do you know that he won a Nobel Prize for figuring that out in 1986? So Jason, inside of the Carlo Brogna study where he found 36 different venoms, these include cobra toxin, bungaro toxin, and conotoxins. During the pandemic, while we're being locked down, they are taking animals in labs around the world and injecting them with alpha conotoxin and then other ones with alpha cobra toxin, and they publish that within 72 hours. Those venoms specifically cross the blood-brain barrier, target glioma C6 cells in the brainstem of these mammals, and develop a brain tumor called a glioblastoma, and they show it, how fast they can grow it in 72 hours. These animals had no brain tumor until they injected them with alpha conotoxin, alpha cobra toxin, and they can grow a brain tumor in less than 72 hours. Jason, the very next thing they do after 72 hours of creating a brain tumor, which they say the venom binds to nicotine receptors, alpha-7 nicotine receptors, and then the body starts producing massive amounts of the same nerve cells as a reaction to the venom. Over the next 72 hours, they only treat the animals with one thing, and they want to see what happens. They inject them with 2 different doses of nicotine, and they proved and showed under electron microscope they could completely obliterate the actual glioblastoma brain tumor in 72 hours with just nicotine.
And it works that fast.
And it works that fast. In fact, it worked so fast that at 72 hours, 50% of the entire tumor was gone after just administering nicotine, that they canceled the study. Why would you cancel the study? Why don't you just see if in the next 72 hours you get 100% of it gone? What's the danger? During the pandemic, while we're being locked down, knowing the COVID-19 vaccines are going around and these DNA plasmids with spike protein genes are going around, they're calling a respiratory virus called COVID, with all these venoms in them, they are publishing that those venoms they found, those 36 venoms, they are injecting those into animals all around the world to see what they do in mammals. And I can 100% show you that they can create 4 irreversible human diseases with these venoms in 72 hours or less, and I will name them. They can create a glioblastoma brain tumor in 72 hours or less. They can create a type 1 diabetic in less than 24 hours with those venoms. Did you hear me? They can inject king cobra venom, cone snail venom, bungaro toxin into an animal and turn it into a type 1 diabetic in less than 24 hours. That's supposedly irreversible and genetic. Can't cure that one. Okay, so they create type 1 diabetics. They also create Parkinson's animals in 72 hours or less with these venoms. And then they are creating myocarditis animals in less than 72 hours. And then every single one of these irreversible human diseases that are in these mammals that they created with the same venoms, they are putting in COVID patients and finding in COVID patients and in the COVID-19 vaccines. Every single one of those, Jason, the only treatment they used was experimenting with 3 different measurements of nicotine. And in every single case, they reversed type 1 diabetes in less than 24 hours with nicotine. They reversed the glioblastoma brain tumor in less than 72 hours with nicotine. They reversed Parkinson's with nicotine. Do you know they've actually published studies, I didn't know this, that Parkinson's, if you have twins and one twin is a smoker and the other is not, that there's a higher propensity for the non-smoker to become Parkinson's than the smokers?
Really?
Yeah, and they're genetically identical. Nicotine prevents also Parkinson's. Did you know that? They're lying to you about that too. All right, so when my Watch the Water documentary dropped and I said the antidote of COVID is nicotine. Did you see 2 months later, from when I dropped Watch the Water, within 2 months, did you see that England, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia all introduced brand new national health agenda campaigns? Did you see this?
No.
They all announced in unison in the same week that there is brand new national health agendas for their countries, and they were all identical. We will have a tobacco-free country. We will have a tobacco-free country by the year 2030. New Zealand took it even further and said, oh no, not us. We're going to have a tobacco-free country by the year 2025. Really? Did you see what Joe Biden said last month? We are going to be the first administration in U.S. history to reduce and put a cap on how much nicotine is allowed in tobacco products moving forward.
Interesting.
Nothing else, just nicotine. You better be careful. They know the antidote is nicotine. Thank God. Dr. Ed Group that you know, we have already been sourcing organic eggplants from around the world, and we are going to figure out antidotes using nicotine from the eggplants that aren't illegal until America decides to make them illegal.
That'll come too.
We are going to find natural resources.
Now, just for more clarity for anybody watching that wants to try this at home with nicotine patches, is there a specific company that you would recommend? Certain dosages? You know, we don't want anybody doing something that can hurt themselves.
Sure, this is a great question actually that I want the audience to hear. So I've actually done research to see, and not me just alone, a group of us, to see what are the cleanest, least toxic adhesive patches that might be manufactured around the world. And we do have one brand it's called that Rugby, we do recommend the most. R-U-G-B-Y. The only place I can actually find them is on Amazon. So that's the brand we like the most, but I do not think that people just need to use that brand. We're trying to give you hope and freedom from your suffering. So even if it's just for 6 days using any brand, always start with the lowest dose. Please don't forget it. They only come in 3 sizes, 7, 14, and 21 milligrams. When you're using nicotine, the principle behind nicotine, it releases venom off your cells. Now there's venom floating around in your body. So you're releasing the venoms. If you're using too much nicotine, you'll release a whole lot of venom at once, and some people might get nauseous, vomiting, diarrhea. If that happens to you on the first day of using the 7 milligram patch, just cut it in half and wear a smaller one the next day. This is what I would recommend. I personally, for prevention, buy a 14 milligram size and cut it into 6 equal pieces and wear one of those little patches every day, and I have for a year now, just to prevent any circulating venoms that I might come across. There are ways that you can protect yourself at home. They will continue to target and weaponize pathogens and toxins through your water. If you're not already aware, they're already using formaldehyde and have been putting that poison in your water every day for decades. So they are used to using this system to deliver poisons to you. But there are simple things you can do at home to protect your family. Number one, you need to put a reverse osmosis system in your home to actually filter out as much of the crap they're putting in your water at home, including toxins and pathogens. You also need to have a distiller. There's nothing that purifies water better than a distiller to remove and leave outside of the water in the condensation all of the toxins, glyphosate, pesticides, poisons they put in your water. There are simple things you can do at home, for sure. You do not have to be afraid or succumb to their actual poisons. There's a massive agenda worldwide to create infertility and miscarriages. With the COVID-19 vaccine agenda, it's been reported by many medical doctors, many countries around the world, that women are losing their pregnancies after receiving a COVID-19 injection. There is something every single woman who has lost a baby after getting these COVID-19 shots has to do. You need to tell your medical professional to order a test. It's called the L-amino acid oxidase test, LAAO. You can actually provide a sample through urine and blood to do this test. If it comes back positive, we have the research studies to prove to you they have been using L-amino acid oxidase from snake venom to kill cells that maintain pregnancy. They're called syncytium cells. And if it comes back positive in your blood work, you need to ask yourself, how did snake venom L-amino acid oxidase get inside of you to create a miscarriage or to make you infertile? Because that's exactly what they're designing with this weaponized venom protein. And if it does come back positive that you find you do have L-amino acid oxidase in your bloodstream or in your body, there's actually 2 antidotes to it. One is called EDTA that completely obliterates it, and just so you know, your future pregnancies will be maintained. Then number 2, zinc is also an inhibitor of L-amino acid oxidase. Third, they've actually published that L-amino acid oxidase venom protein in a human is only allowed to be active to kill the cells that maintain a pregnancy if your pH remains between 5.5 and 7.5. If you clean up your diet and make your body more alkaline, go between 7.5 and 8, the actual venom becomes inactivated. If you use an infrared sauna and get the actual degrees to go up 131 degrees, that also kills and denatures the protein of L-amino acid oxidase. So infrared saunas and helping you eliminate this from your body through saunas and through diet is massively beneficial. And then include EDTA and zinc. Super easy solutions that God gave you. There's been a report by medical doctors around the world that there's a high percentage of patients after getting the COVID-19 shots are developing blood clots. And they are asking other practitioners around the world to evaluate your patients and run a medical test, a blood test, called an elevated D-dimer. What is an elevated D-dimer test? It's something most doctors don't run, actually, but if you ask for it, LabCorp, Quest, and other labs around the world run this very easy test. They take your blood, and if it comes back elevated, this D-dimer, it means your body is forming blood clots inside the body. The D-dimer is a reflection of how many particles of the broken down blood clots there are. Now, if you go to medscape.com, they tell you that all medical doctors, if you see elevated D-dimer, make sure you go start looking for blood clots, or look to see if your patient is on a blood thinner like warfarin and heparin that breaks down blood clots. They might be on too much of that drug. The fifth thing on medscape.com, they tell every patient around the world, or every medical doctor, if you have elevated D-dimers, medical professionals test that individual for snake venom poisoning. If you have elevated D-dimers, or if you have symptoms of blood clots and you do not test positive for an elevated D-dimer, that doesn't mean you don't have blood clots. The Department of Defense has created what they call a self-assembling nanoparticle hydrogel that creates blood clots that aren't broken down by your own body's plasmin, nor does heparin, warfarin, or Coumadin break them down either. If you have symptoms of blood clots, they do a Doppler test and see you do have blood clots, but your elevated D-dimers are not elevated, they're just normal levels. That means you have 2 snake venoms that have been injected inside of you. They're called ecarin, E-C-A-R-I-N, from the soft-scaled viper snake, and another protein called textillinin from the eastern brown snake in India. And this self-assembling nanoparticle hydrogel, 2 snakes-infused proteins, is a patented creation of the United States Department of Defense. You can have your ecarin levels tested by medical professionals and textillinin. Textillinin blocks warfarin, heparin, and Coumadin from breaking down blood clots. Ecarin from the other snake rapidly creates 8 times faster blood clotting in the human body than God designed your body to create. So if you're suspicious and want to get tested and have your elevated D-dimers tested, go to your medical professional, ask them to actually order a elevated D-dimer test. Actually, it's just called a D-dimer test. Tell them you want a D-dimer blood test run. If that doctor looks at you and says, why do you want to have that done? You say, I listened to Dr. Artis' interview and I'd like to know if it was actually accurate. Do I have this or not? That's what I would say. And if they don't know what that is, they don't know who I am, just say, please run the test. This is what I want. And if that doctor says, I don't think you need to run that test, then go to another medical professional and get it. And if they don't help you, it's really much easier than that. You can call LabCorp, Quest, or any blood laboratory, Genova Labs included. You can call them and say you'd like to pay cash for a D-dimer test. And walk down to the lab and pay for it, and they can help you. When your D-dimer test results come back, if it is positive that you have higher than normal elevated D-dimers, the D-dimer will be in black bold letters, and they will give you the number of the value, and that is all the test tells you. All it's going to tell you is you have blood clots in your body, and they're trying to be broken down in the body. That's all you know. After you know that's there is when a medical professional would then go, oh man, you do have blood clots in your body. We need to put you on a anticoagulant drug like heparin or warfarin. I wouldn't do that. There's actually ways to break down blood clots, and you don't need drugs to do it. There's actually a substance called glycyrrhizin acid inside of licorice root that actually destroys all blood clotting effects of all snake venoms. You don't need a drug. It's actually the most potent, powerful, blood clot dissolving substance on earth. And then nattokinase at 7,000 furin units is another cure for blood clots in the body. And one of the ultimate favorites, 2,000 milligrams of N-acetylcysteine, completely obliterates blood clots also, and these are all natural substances. There is a billion-dollar industry that was created in the last 5 years, creating new blockbuster drugs that you at home are injecting inside of your body once a week. They're for weight loss and diabetes, and they're called GLP-1 drugs. Ozempic Ozempic, and another one called Wegovy. They're actually made by the same company. These are just the brand names, Wegovy and Ozempic. Do you know that Ozempic and Wegovy have published side effects of causing thyroid cancers in your thyroid after using it for 1 year? And do you know that it causes acute kidney failure, chronic kidney failure, acute liver failure, and chronic liver failure? And in diabetics, it increases the speed of diabetic retinopathy, leading to blindness. Do you know where Ozempic and Wegovy is made? Do you know what it comes from? Do you know what a GLP-1 targeted drug is? Look it up. Look up Ozempic and Gila monster venom from the lizard in the southwestern deserts of America. And then ask your doctor, am I fat, overweight, and diabetic because I'm Gila monster deficient? Really? Venoms cause cancer. Venoms destroy the body. And look it up. CNN published the other day that people taking these drugs are developing paralyzed stomachs, causing paralytic and cyclic vomiting for 1.5 to 2 years after they stop the drug, and it's destroying their entire life because the venom of that creature binds to your vagal nerve and doesn't let your stomach empty your food into your intestines. And every meal you eat that can't get into your intestines, you're piling up more food in your stomach. What did God design the body to do if it's getting full of food in your stomach? If the food ain't going down, it's coming back up. And you guys don't know this at home. Every venom introduced into your body, either by injection or by an animal, it stays in your body for 10 years unless you release it, break it apart, and detox it. This is why you're seeing the long-term side effects from COVID and from these venom-laced drugs. One of the most important things I want people to understand is I'm trying to help you remove the confusion out of the symptoms you're carrying and have been experiencing for the last several years. One of the most frequently asked questions and things that are published is this idea of something called shedding. That people who are getting vaccinated for COVID-19 are shedding whatever it is was injected into them onto people who were not vaccinated. And that includes spouses, children, coworkers, grandparents. All of a sudden, when you're around these people who got the vaccines, you start having symptoms even though you weren't vaccinated. It's being reported all over the world. The only thing that explains it, I can already tell you how they're doing it. They are taking spike protein genes inside of DNA plasmids, and when they inject them inside of you in the vaccines that we just showed you with the NIH paper, bacteria and yeast in your body will draw the DNA plasmid in with the venom spike protein in it, and it will start manufacturing venom without stopping. There's only a promoter gene in the plasmid, so it just tells the bacteria to keep making the venom. And the question for all of you at home, medical doctors and scientists around the world, is bacteria contagious? Is yeast contagious? Are funguses and candida contagious? Yes. Who are they contagious to? Anyone you're around, breathing on, touching, sleeping with, kissing on. You transfer bacteria and yeast to each other. When the plasmid with the venom gets inside the bacteria and yeast, they never stop manufacturing the venom. The more sugar you eat, you replicate more of these venom-producing bacteria, and you are going to shed them through your breast milk to your babies. You're going to shed them through your kisses to your husband, and now they're going to have the bacteria. Your baby are going to have your bacteria and the yeast, and in their body, those bacteria and yeast are replicating the venoms. This is the extension of when I say these are not just bioweapons, they have weaponized biology. They have weaponized biology to create venom payloads. And you can share them through touch, kiss, sex, breast milk, you name it. That is shedding, and that's exactly how they're doing it. If anything can be taken away from this, I did not want to know anything about remdesivir. I didn't want to know anything about snake venom in relationship to COVID. I didn't want to know anything about nicotine being addictive or not. I didn't care. But circumstances woke me up to that there was a fraud or a lie, and I needed to go find out for myself how far did that lie and deception go, so I could make sense of the madness being created around me that they called a pandemic. Did you know, world, that the pharmaceutical industry and the medical community, they love one particular language to keep us confused, and you at home confused, and seeing them as some superior orator or human being. They love a language called Latin. Did you know that Latin, and every medical terminology is in Latin? Did you know that every diagnosis is in some form of Latin? Do you know that the Latin definition of the word virus is actually venom. And do you know that was published in the Wall Street Journal in February of 2020? That the reason why the word virus is so important to put into the naming of this pandemic is because the word virus historically means venom. All venoms target nicotine receptors. All nicotine receptors control the entire function of your human frame. There are other nutrients the body needs, obviously, but this has been a great fraud and a great lie. Please put your faith in what God created in your own ability to read, study, and then use your own intuition and trust in God and pray.
Thank you. And I want to remind everybody that's watching today that, number one, if you're watching this right now, it's not by coincidence. There's a divine order, an intelligent order to absolutely everything. You're here not to be quiet because you're afraid of what your coworker or colleague or boss or mother or father or anybody may say about what you bring to the table. You're here to speak the truth and to spread that no matter the consequence. That's what people like Dr. Brian Ardis are doing. His life has been in danger multiple times, and he still does this work. And he has no other motive to do this work other than helping us be our best selves, other than helping us live healthy lives, because that's our birthright. It's not normal to have cancer proliferate all around the world. It's not normal for the world to be as sick as it is today. And it's not just the way it is. That's just the way that we made it. And just like we made the world sick, we can also make the world healthy if we choose to use our free will and exercise our free will in a positive way. We can only do that through awareness. So I hope you guys enjoyed this interview today. It's all about the antidote. It's about understanding the problem and then focusing on a solution. So I ask you to share this interview far and wide, download it, put it on every single possible platform that you can. And let's do what we came here to do. Wake up the world and make it a healthy and bright world once again. So thank you, Brian, very much. I appreciate you. And I look forward to doing more work together in the future.
God bless you, and God bless you all at home. And it really has been one mission. I could not and was not able to save my father-in-law. And as many people at home that we can, I will continue to fight, do research, and present those antidotes to you.
Thank you.
Φίλες και φίλοι, από ό,τι είδατε ήταν μια συνταρακτική συνέντευξη. Θα πρέπει να γνωρίζουμε όλοι ότι αυτοί είναι πραγματικά οι γιατροί. Και όχι όλοι αυτοί οι άλλοι που σας λένε ό,τι θέλουν. Είναι η αποστολή μας, είναι για μας η αποστολή μας εδώ και τουλάχιστον 3,5 χρόνια. Να δώσουμε αυτή την αφύπνιση, να φύγουν αυτά τα βίντεο και να πάνε παντού σε όλο τον κόσμο. Είναι πλέον υποχρέωσή σας, ακόμα και αν χάνετε και προφίλ, ακόμα και αν χρειαστεί να φτιάξετε κι άλλα, ακόμα και αν μπορείτε να έρθετε να μας βρείτε στο Rumble ή να τοποθετείτε αυτά τα βίντεο όπου μπορείτε να τα κατεβάσετε, και αν κατέβει και αυτό το βίντεο και προσπαθήσουν να το κατεβάσουν, πάλι θα το βρείτε στο Rumble. Να είστε όλοι καλά, να μεταδώσετε αυτά τα νέα. Πάρτε χαρτί και μολύβι και σημειώστε αυτά που υπόθηκαν. Μην ξεχάσετε ότι το EDTA και η νοικοτήνη είναι κάποια φοβερά εργαλεία για τα χέρια όλου του κόσμου. Να είστε όλοι καλά, να έχετε ένα καλό βράδυ και παρακολουθήστε όλα τα επόμενα επεισόδια που έχουμε, γιατί θα είναι ακριβώς το ίδιο στυλ, με φοβερές αποκαλύψεις. Αποκαλύψεις οι οποίες θα πρέπει να μπορέσουν να σας ξυπνήσουν για να πάτε καλύτερα. Να είστε καλά, καλό βράδυ.
Πληροφορία, ενημέρωση, γνώση, ίσον δύναμη. Σε μια εποχή που η λογική βρίσκεται υποδιωγμών, το διαδικτυακό κανάλι Social Media ORM Group και οι θυγατρικές διαδικτυακές του σελίδες πρωτοστατούν, παρουσιάζοντας σε καθημερινή βάση επιστήμονες αλλά και ενεργούς πολίτες της διπλανής πόρτας στον αγώνα της αμερόληπτης και με ήθος ενημέρωσης κόντρα στην κατευθυνόμενη προπαγάνδα των συστημικών μέσων μαζικής παραπληροφόρησης. Σας καλούμε να στηρίξετε την ανιδιοτελή μας προσπάθεια. Και η ελαχιστότατη συνδρομή σας είναι πολύτιμη για να μείνει αυτή η πατριωτική φωνή δυνατή. Social Media ORM Group.